I knew something was off the moment I walked back into the fluorescent wasteland they called an office. 2 weeks out recovering from minor surgery, and my desk looked like the scene of a bureaucratic crime. Foreign paperwork stacked on my chair, my nameplate shoved off to the corner, and the faint smell of someone else's cologne still lingering in the air. The chair still bore the imprint of someone heavier than me, someone who thought they belonged there now. I didn't have to wonder long. He found me before I'd even set down my bag. "You must be the compliance gal," he said with a grin that had too many teeth and not enough warmth. Tailored suit, booming voice, Bluetooth earpiece perpetually glowing like it was a badge of honor. "I'm Victor Blaine, your new VP. Sales background, results driven, no fluff, no friction." He said it like a slogan. Before I could get a word in, he tossed out the phrase that would live rent-free in my head for months. "Your title was always kind of inflated, right?" He said it casually, like he was doing me a favor by telling me my entire career had been a joke. I smiled the way professionals do when someone throws a drink in their face but calls it a toast. That's when I decided, if Victor didn't respect the title, he was about to meet the job. Every shortcut he took, I'd log it. Every missing signature, every "don't worry about it," documented. Not because I wanted revenge, though he'd assume that. I just intended to do my job. Thoroughly. That first team meeting set the tone. Victor was all about streamlining, which, in Blaine speak, meant tossing out compliance steps like expired coupons. When I handed him our department's orientation packet, he didn't even look up from his phone. "I'll wing it," he muttered. "I've been closing deals since before you were learning this stuff." He strutted into meetings like a man who'd already bought the company with monopoly money and expected us all to pretend it was real cash. The first red flag came fast. During his presentation to senior leadership, he showed trimmed costs, slashed timelines, and pie charts that might as well have had unicorns galloping across them. Everyone clapped. They always clap, until someone checks the math. He never asked for my input, not once. My predecessor had fought tooth and nail to ensure our team never touched the wrong side of an audit. Victor was undoing that legacy before his second lunch break. He made little digs at me in front of the team. "Here comes the paperwork patrol," he'd joke, or "better ask the compliance cop before we breathe." Laughter followed. Awkward, thin laughter. But it followed. Because when someone like Victor Blaine sets the tone, people adjust to stay employed. I didn't respond. I took notes. I created a private encrypted archive on a drive not connected to the company's system. I documented everything with surgical precision. Dates, quotes, approvals skipped, corners cut. Victor's favorite line? "It's not rocket science." He used it to dismiss every policy he didn't understand, which was most of them. That week alone, I caught him approving a financial disclosure missing 4 required sign-offs. When I pointed it out, he smiled like I'd just told him a bedtime story. "You worry too much. That's why I'm here, to balance you out." Balance? Like putting a brick on the gas pedal and calling it cruise control? By Friday, I had already sent him 3 formal warning emails. Each outlined the ignored regulation, the risks involved, and what needed correcting. He didn't respond. Not once. I imagined the unread subject lines sitting in his inbox like little grenades with pulled pins. It was going to be a very interesting quarter. Victor didn't just ignore protocols. He bulldozed over them with the confidence of someone who thought regulations were speed bumps built for lesser people. I kept my voice calm and my records meticulous. Each time he brushed off a federal requirement, I added it to the archive. Not for vengeance, yet, but because someone had to care. The first serious jolt came on a rainy Tuesday. A quarterly compliance report hit my desk, the kind I usually reviewed before final submission. Normally, these documents were pristine, signed, checked, cross-referenced, This one looked like a mock-up made during a lunch break. The revision date was off by nearly 2 months. Half the signatures were missing. Worse, the compliance box, the one that certifies all standards were legally met, was blank, completely unchecked. Not even a fake signature, just left like it didn't matter. I didn't panic. Panic gets people sloppy. Instead, I pulled the previous quarter's report and went line by line. It didn't take long to see the edits. Line items rounded, expenses trimmed, timelines adjusted. Not errors. Choices. Intentional ones. That's when something in my gut shifted. This wasn't carelessness. This was willful negligence. The kind that might fly under the radar until an audit turned it into a 5-alarm fire. So I drafted a formal warning email. Clinical, cold, precise. I listed the discrepancies in bullet points, cited the relevant clauses from the Federal Compliance Act, and requested immediate corrections prior to submission. I sent it only to Victor, for now, giving him the benefit of the doubt. He replied 2 hours later. Got it. That was it. No action. No update. Just those 2 useless words. The next day, a vendor certification landed in my inbox. I spotted the forgery instantly. I'd seen the real signature dozens of times, and this one looked like someone had copied it during a bumpy bus ride. The date didn't even match our shipment logs. I walked into Victor's office, closed the door, and laid the paper in front of him. This can't go forward, I said, tapping the fake signature. It's invalid. We need the actual sign-off. Victor barely glanced at it. They're on vacation. It's fine. They'll approve it later. That's not how this works, I replied, keeping my voice even. If we submit this now, it's falsified. He leaned back in his chair, wearing that smirk that made people question their own sanity. You've been in compliance too long, he said. Sometimes you have to bend a little to keep things moving. I didn't argue. There's no reasoning with someone who treats laws like optional reading. I just went back to my desk, transcribed the entire exchange word for word, and sent my second warning email. This one CC'd to his assistant for visibility. And I saved it. Over the next week, it became a rhythm. Victor cut corners. I documented them. Forms were missing approval signatures. Safety checks were marked completed, when inspection logs showed they never happened. Certifications were backdated to avoid late penalties. Each time, I sent a warning. Each time, he ignored it. By that Friday, 5 warning emails sat in my private archive. Each one quiet, professional. A knife in a velvet case, waiting. Victor strutted through the office like he was too fast to get caught. He boasted about streamlining our processes. What he was really doing was lighting regulatory fires and dancing over the smoke. I didn't speak up in meetings. I didn't raise my voice. I just took notes, dates, signatures, skipped steps, each detail stitched into a timeline that, if needed, would unfold with perfect clarity. He thought I was invisible, but I knew exactly how visible he was going to be when the wrong person asked the right question. By the 3rd week, my inbox had become the most boring crime novel ever written. Same plot, different entries. Victor skips protocol. I flag it. He shrugs. I document it. If someone had asked me to prepare exhibits for a federal trial, I'd already be halfway done. Warning email number 6 documented a procurement request that bypassed competitive bidding requirements entirely. Number 7 flagged a fake safety training record. 24 employees magically certified despite never attending a session. Number 8 caught a blatant date manipulation on a hazardous materials form, changing the disposal timeline to dodge a fine. Each message I sent was a model of legal professionalism. Neutral tone, clear citations, time-stamped attachments. Auditors love that stuff. No emotion, no ambiguity. Victor's response? Silence, mostly. Sometimes a thanks, or worse, a chuckle. He once replied with, "Appreciate the enthusiasm," like I was a cheerleader for due diligence, but the cracks were growing. I overheard him in the break room one morning, holding court like a game show host. He was telling two junior staffers about how he'd fast-tracked a shipment by skipping pointless hoops, his exact words. He even tossed a mock salute. "Sorry, officer paperwork," he said, laughing. "But some of us have real work to do." I didn't confront him. I just stirred my coffee, walked out, and added fast-tracking admission, verbal, to the notes. Because here's the thing, those hoops? They were federally mandated safety protocols. Skipping them wasn't efficiency. It was risk. The kind that ends with headlines and subpoenas. By then, I'd sent 12 warnings, 12 separate violations, each one backed by documentation, each tied to specific compliance clauses, each ignored. At warning 15, something in me shifted. Up to that point, I'd been trying to protect the company, trying to help, trying to be a guide rail for a man speeding toward a cliff. But you can't help someone who won't acknowledge the breaks exist. So I stopped thinking of my archive as just in case. I started treating it like evidence. Victor still thought I was harmless. Just the quiet compliance officer, always typing, always sending fussy little emails. He'd stop by my office sometimes, toss a report on my desk, and say something like, "Don't look too hard at that one, okay?" As if we were in on something together, as if my silence was for sale. The arrogance was breathtaking. Worse, it was escalating. I found an inspection report where every item had been marked pass, but the equipment in question had been flagged for repair in our own internal logs. I found a fake drill record for an emergency response exercise that never happened. By week 6, I had 27 violations logged, full documentation. Digital backups, cross-referenced to vendor logs, internal systems, and policy manuals. To Victor, I was invisible. To me, he was radioactive. So I escalated. Not for drama, not to stir things up, just to follow process. Company protocol clearly stated, if your direct supervisor ignores documented compliance breaches, you go to HR. So I scheduled a meeting. I sat across from a woman whose facial expression hadn't changed since 2008. I laid it all out. Falsified reports, forged sign-offs, safety drills skipped, vendor approvals forged, everything. I even redacted identifying info so I couldn't be accused of breaching internal confidentiality. She glanced through the documents, nodded at all the right places, then smiled politely. "Well, the new VP has full operational discretion," she said. "We're expected to support his vision." His vision? I tasted blood from biting the inside of my cheek. Victor's vision was a regulatory time bomb, but HR didn't care. As long as the quarterly numbers looked clean, nothing else mattered. When HR brushed me off, I tried one more angle. I booked time with the CFO, figuring maybe, just maybe, the person responsible for safeguarding the company's assets would care about the legal risks Victor was creating. I walked him through some of the more egregious violations, ones even a disinterested exec couldn't ignore. Forged certifications, falsified safety logs, altered financials. He didn't even pretend to care. "Victor knows what he's doing," the CFO said with a shrug. "He's here to make us leaner. Faster. Let him work." That was it. That's when the light finally clicked. It wasn't that they didn't see the problem. They saw it. They just didn't want to solve it. Every official channel had closed. Not clogged, closed. On purpose. They'd all decided Victor's shortcuts were worth the risk, because if it blew up later, they could always point at him and say, "He went rogue." So I changed my approach. I stopped trying to persuade people who'd already decided to ignore me. Instead, I widened my warning trail. I started CCing mid-level directors, operations leads, even Victor's assistant. Still no accusations, no dramatic language. Just the facts. The irregularity. the regulation it violated, and the corrective step needed. And every single time, the result was the same: silence. But now, the silence had a timestamp, a read receipt, proof. So, when someone eventually tried to say, "I had no idea," I could point to an email opened at 9:47 a.m. on a Thursday, sitting right there in their inbox. Oddly enough, once I accepted that I was being ignored, everything became easier. There's a strange power in being disregarded. It meant I could build something under their noses, and no one thought to stop me. Victor continued to believe his own legend. He'd stop by my office to gloat about cutting 2 weeks off a vendor process, never mentioning that those 2 weeks were meant for federally mandated inspections. In staff meetings, he'd call me our compliance guru with a smirk. Everyone would chuckle. I chuckled too. Not because it was funny, but because I knew the punchline was coming. And I had all the receipts. At some point, the number of warnings stopped feeling abstract. 31 became 38. Each email was logged, backed up, and encrypted in 2 separate off-site drives. I wasn't just documenting a timeline. I was preserving a narrative, one no lawyer could wiggle out of. If no one inside the company cared to stop Victor, someone outside eventually would. They'd just need a guide. And I was building the map. Then one Monday morning, it arrived. An email slipped into my inbox like any other memo. Except this one had weight. Subject: Notice of Federal Compliance Review. I reread it twice, then a third time. 4 weeks from now, a federal agency would begin its full audit. One known for its intensity, precision, and complete lack of humor. These weren't the kind of inspectors who settled for coffee and charm. This was it. Every backdated document, every skipped inspection, every forged signature Victor had waved off with a smirk. Those were about to become evidence. Victor got the notice too. I know, because 5 minutes later, his voice thundered across the floor, calling everyone into the conference room. I took my usual seat near the back, notepad ready. Meetings like this were always good for memorable quotes. "All right, team," Victor clapped, pacing in front of the whiteboard. "We've got a little housekeeping to do before our friends from the feds show up." Housekeeping. That was his word for covering up a mountain of fraud. Victor didn't say the word falsify, but he didn't need to. His instructions were clear. "Start from the last 18 months, he said, pacing like a bad coach at halftime. "Clean it all up. Dates, signatures, checkboxes, whatever's missing, just make it match. So clean, they could eat off it." He was telling the entire department to commit retroactive fraud in broad daylight. There was a flicker in the room. Discomfort. Side glances. Someone shifted in their seat, but no one spoke. That's the thing about corporate fear. It's quiet. Then his eyes landed on me. "And I'll need your help especially," he added, pointing like I was the prize goat at a county fair. "You've got the best handle on the details. Just smooth it out." I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I just said evenly, "You mean falsify them?" A few heads turned. Victor laughed, tight and strained. No, just fix the inconsistencies. We're all on the same team here." "If the inconsistencies are real," I said calmly, "they're not mine to fix. They're for the auditors to review." The silence that followed was deafening. Not one keyboard clacked, not a single breath out of place. Victor's smile froze for a moment too long before he pivoted to the next item on his list. The meeting adjourned in forced chatter. People moved with the strange stiffness of a room that had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. I walked back to my desk, opened my archive, and looked at the folder count. 41 documented violations, each backed by evidence, each with its own timestamp, regulation citation, and red receipt. That afternoon, Victor stopped by my office again. Leaned on the doorframe like he always did when he was trying to seem casual. "You know," he said, his tone lower now. This doesn't have to be a big deal. They're not going to look that hard. I looked him in the eye. Maybe, or maybe they'll look exactly that hard. He smirked, his old default, but there was a flicker now. Doubt. The first crack in his polished indifference. For the first time, I think he saw me not as the nagging compliance officer, but as someone holding a live wire. I didn't need to tip off the auditors. I didn't need to make it a big deal. All I had to do was wait 4 weeks. They'd ask for everything. And when they did, the truth would speak for itself. Quiet, cold, and well organized. That same day, I drafted one final email. Warning number 42. This one was different. It wasn't just another itemized list of irregularities. It was a map of Victor's misconduct in full. Every fresh violation since the audit notice, altered logs, forged vendor sign-offs, fake safety drills, and beside each, the exact regulation broken, the fines, the legal consequences, even the possibility of criminal liability. I addressed it directly to him. No CCs this time, just me, him, and the future. I hit send. Then I saved the email, the delivery receipt, and the read confirmation to my encrypted archive. 7 minutes later, he replied, just one emoji, followed by, relax, this isn't life or death. I stared at the screen, not in shock. Victor's arrogance was nothing new, but because of what that sentence meant. To him, compliance was a joke, because he'd never been the one holding the liability. I didn't respond. What was left to say? That afternoon, I watched him in the break room telling another story. Something about how he'd cleaned up a report for the audit. The junior staffers laughed. They didn't realize cleaned up was his code for altered beyond recognition. I didn't correct him, didn't interrupt, didn't look up. I didn't have to. I walked back to my desk with a calm I hadn't felt in months. There was no more threading the needle, no more trying to steer Victor toward accountability. That window had slammed shut. From here on out, I wasn't nudging or warning. I was waiting. When the auditors requested documentation, I would give them exactly what they asked for. Nothing more, nothing less. Just the raw, unvarnished history of Victor Blaine's decisions, preserved in perfect detail. And the timing couldn't have been more poetic. At 9:14 a.m. on a Wednesday, the request came in. Subject: Request for compliance records. 18-month review. Polite, sterile, surgical in tone. But I knew what it meant. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This was the moment. I reread the line twice, letting it settle. Then I opened my encrypted archive. 42 folders. Each folder included the original warning email, attachments, document scans, screenshots, and in some cases, transcripts of verbal exchanges. Labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced. It looked less like an inbox and more like a federal case file. I attached the first 10 folders to an email addressed to the lead auditor, then the next 10, then the next. 4 emails in total. No commentary, no need for a summary. Each subject line matched the request exactly. The documents told the story better than I ever could. They'd see it for themselves, the blank compliance boxes, the faked signatures, the backdated certifications. And next to each, my original warning email, calm, professional, clearly outlining the violation, citing the relevant regulation, and requesting a correction. Followed by silence. Victor's silence. When the last email was sent, I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What I felt was relief, like putting down a weight I'd carried for too long. Victor was 3 desks away, laughing into his headset about a huge win he'd just secured. He had no idea that the complete record of his misconduct was now sitting in the inboxes of people trained to notice every lie, every shortcut, every falsified form. I went back to my normal work, logged a shipment, answered a vendor question, but I kept glancing at the corner of my screen, watching the clock. At 9:58, the first read receipt came in. At 10:02, the second. By 10:07, all 4 emails had been opened. Somewhere in a federal building, auditors were clicking through attachments, reviewing timelines, cross-checking signatures, and Victor Blaine's name was on more than one of those pages. I didn't say a word, didn't watch him, didn't tip anything off. The power of this moment was in its stillness. The ripple started small. A strange hush passed over the office floor. A glance here, a half-whispered comment there. Phones were being picked up, then put back down. Victor's assistant looked pale. She kept glancing at her inbox like it had just delivered a ghost. Victor, oblivious as ever, kept laughing into his phone. But the air around him had changed. It was heavier now. By 10:45, the silence was thick. The kind of silence that only happens when people start realizing. At 10:53, my phone buzzed. A text. From Mark, a former co-worker who'd left right before Victor's arrival. Why are federal agents asking for him by name? I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because that word, agents, meant everything. Not auditors, not consultants, agents. That distinction, agents, not auditors, wasn't subtle. It was the difference between a compliant slap on the wrist and a full-blown federal investigation. At 11:06 a.m., I saw them. 2 men in dark suits entered the building with security. Badges clipped to their belts, briefcases in hand. Expressions built for courtrooms, not boardrooms. They didn't stop at reception. They didn't look around. They moved with surgical purpose, heading straight toward the executive corridor. A minute later, they turned into the hallway leading to Victor's office. At 11:12, they reappeared, flanking him. No cuffs, no shouting, just quiet authority. Victor wasn't strutting anymore. His walk was slower, tighter. The confidence he wore like cologne was gone, replaced with a stiff jaw and a sheen of sweat. They guided him, not escorted, guided, into the large, glass-walled conference room. From my desk, I could see everything. Victor sat on one side of the table, hunched forward, elbows on knees. The agents stood. They spoke in low, measured tones, sliding folders across the table. One of them tapped a page for emphasis. Victor didn't speak. He didn't laugh. He just stared, face draining of color, breath shallow. Outside, the entire office was still. No phones ringing, no chatter, just silence. Even people who'd bought into Victor's charisma, who had mimicked his jargon, clapped at his timelines, laughed at his digs, were now quietly recalculating. Every spreadsheet, every handshake, every email. I didn't react. My face stayed neutral. No smirk, no gloating. Let them wonder what I knew. Let Victor wonder most of all. At 11:46, the conference room door opened. The agent stepped out first. Victor followed, this time with handcuffs glinting in the overhead light. His head down, wrists chained. No noise, no drama, just the quiet collapse of a man who thought rules were for other people. The office didn't speak. Not a single word. It didn't have to. The silence was the story. As the agents let him out, I overheard hushed fragments ripple through the floor. Misuse of federal funds. Fraud. Forgery. By the time the elevator doors closed behind them, Victor Blaine was no longer the VP of anything. Not 5 minutes later, a mass email hit every inbox. Emergency all-staff meeting, mandatory attendance, noon. Corporate code for crisis mode activated. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I already knew the plot, and more importantly, I knew the source material. My name wouldn't be mentioned. It didn't need to be. The documentation spoke for itself. All 42 warning emails, each one a chapter in the book Victor never bothered to read. At 11:59, I printed my resignation letter, 2 paragraphs, thanking the company for the years before Victor, stating that my last day was effective immediately. No drama, no accusations, just a quiet, clean exit. I placed the letter face up on my desk, locked my computer, started packing. The few items I kept: a coffee mug, a potted plant, a framed photo. They fit neatly in one small box. As the emergency meeting broke, people emerged in a daze. Nobody asked me anything. A few glanced in my direction, but none of them said it out loud. And that was fine, because the less said, the louder the truth would echo. As I walked out, I passed the very conference room where Victor had sat an hour earlier. Chairs still ajar. A faint scuff where his shoe had dragged across the floor. The folder the agents used was gone, but I didn't need to see it. I'd written most of it, page by page, month by month, one warning at a time. The elevator doors slid closed. For the first time in months, my shoulders relaxed. Victor's career, and likely his freedom, were gone. And I had never once raised my voice.